My beloved, do not scroll away from this moment, because something has been held back for far too long, and the heart connected to yours is reaching a place where silence no longer feels possible. Pause here. What you are about to hear was meant to find you at the exact moment when your spirit could understand it differently. There is a letter forming somewhere between courage and confession, between everything your soulmate has wanted to say and everything they have been afraid to reveal. This is not just a collection of beautiful words. This letter carries a truth they have hidden beneath ordinary conversations, quiet nights, unanswered questions, and moments when they almost reached for you but stopped themselves. Heaven has watched the hesitation. Heaven has seen the words written in their heart before they ever touched a page. And now, something is changing. The secret they once believed they could keep buried is becoming too powerful to remain unspoken. You may have wondered why their energy seemed close one moment and distant the next, why certain memories returned to you without warning, or why your heart sometimes became unusually still when you thought of them. In this fictional spiritual story, imagine that those moments were echoes of a heart wrestling with itself. Your soulmate has been carrying a confession that has grown heavier every time they tried to ignore it. They told themselves they would wait for the right day. Then they told themselves they needed one more sign. Then they tried to convince themselves that perhaps silence would protect everyone involved. But silence did not bring peace. It only made the unsaid truth louder. And lately, especially in the quietest hours, the words they refuse to speak have begun returning with a force they can no longer dismiss. There is something important you must understand before this confession is revealed. The letter is not beginning where you think it begins. It does not begin with, "I miss you." It does not begin with, "I love you." It does not even begin with an apology, although there may be one hidden within it. Their first real confession begins with something far more vulnerable. They admit that they were afraid of how deeply you affected them. They were afraid that knowing you had changed something inside them that could never be returned to the way it was before. They were afraid that once they acknowledged what you meant to them, they would also have to acknowledge every choice they made while pretending you did not matter as much as you truly did. For a long time, they believed strength meant control. They believed they could manage their emotions by keeping them hidden, organizing them into neat little corners of the mind, and continuing with life as though nothing extraordinary had happened. But love does not always obey the plans people make for it. Sometimes a person can walk into another heart quietly and leave fingerprints on places they never intended to touch. Your soulmate began noticing this in the smallest ways. A song would play, and suddenly they would remember something you said. Someone would laugh in a certain way, and they would think of your smile. They would experience a victory and instinctively wonder what you would say. They would feel disappointed and remember how safe it once felt to imagine telling you everything. These were not dramatic moments. That is what made them impossible to escape. You had become woven into the ordinary fabric of their thoughts. And yet, they still resisted. They had reasons. Some of those reasons sounded sensible even to them. Timing. Distance. Pride. Fear of rejection. Fear of repeating old mistakes. Fear that you had already moved forward. Fear that you would see through them too clearly. But beneath all those reasons was one deeper truth they rarely admitted: they feared being fully known by the one person whose opinion mattered most. They could tolerate being misunderstood by strangers. They could tolerate people seeing only the surface. But with you, the possibility of being seen completely felt almost unbearable because your presence seemed to reach beneath every mask they had learned to wear. My child, this is where the letter becomes more personal. They are not simply preparing to tell you what they feel. They are preparing to tell you what happened inside them when they realized they might lose the chance to say it. Something shifted recently. It may not have looked dramatic from the outside. No thunder. No grand announcement. No obvious turning point anyone else could recognize. But there was a moment when they imagined a future in which your life continued beautifully without them, and instead of feeling relief, they felt an emptiness they could no longer explain away. They pictured you laughing with someone who understood your heart. They imagined you receiving the affection you had always deserved. They imagined someone else hearing your stories, learning your silences, standing beside you in the moments they had once secretly hoped would belong to them. And that vision forced a truth to the surface. They realized they were not afraid of loving you. They were afraid of being too late. Stay with this, because their biggest confession goes deeper than that. The words they have been rehearsing are not only about wanting another chance or hoping you still care. There is something about the past they have finally understood. For a long time, they believed the connection between you became complicated because circumstances were wrong. They blamed timing. They blamed confusion. They blamed emotional distance. Perhaps they even blamed you in certain moments because that was easier than examining themselves. But the longer they sat with the silence, the harder it became to maintain that story. Eventually, they began replaying everything with a different kind of honesty, and the truth they discovered unsettled them. They saw moments when you were offering sincerity and they answered with uncertainty. They remembered times when you were trying to understand them and they hid behind short replies or emotional walls. They remembered how quickly fear could make them retreat even when their heart wanted to move closer. Most painfully, they remembered moments when they sensed you needed reassurance, but they withheld it because they did not know how to give without exposing how much they cared. They thought keeping some distance would protect them. Now they understand that it may have made you question something that was actually very real. This realization became the first sentence they could not erase. They wrote it once. Deleted it. Wrote it again. Changed the wording. Put the page away. Came back. Read it in silence. Their hands may have been still, but inside, everything was moving. The sentence was simple in meaning: you were never imagining what was between us. They wanted you to know that first because they have wondered whether their inconsistency made you doubt your own experience. They know there were moments when their behavior contradicted their feelings. They know silence can make even genuine affection feel like an illusion. And if they could remove one burden from your heart before saying anything else, it would be the burden of wondering whether you cared alone. But this is not the biggest confession. The next part of their letter reveals something they have never said aloud. There was a moment, perhaps longer ago than you realize, when they quietly imagined a life with you. Not a passing fantasy. Not a dramatic daydream. something quieter and more intimate. They imagined ordinary mornings. They imagined what your voice would sound like when neither of you was performing for the world. They imagined disagreement followed by understanding. They imagined holidays, tired evenings, shared plans, small traditions, ridiculous jokes no one else would understand. They imagined being present when life was not exciting, because somewhere inside them they knew that true closeness is built less through dramatic declarations and more through staying when nothing extraordinary is happening. That frightened them. Why? Because once someone begins imagining the ordinary with another person, the heart has usually crossed a boundary the mind can no longer pretend does not exist. They realized they did not merely want a moment with you. They wanted continuity. They wanted to know the version of you that exists beyond appearances, beyond first impressions, beyond the story other people tell about you. They wanted to know what makes you quiet. What makes you feel safe? What kind of future would make you wake up with peace rather than pressure? They wanted to become someone you could trust with those answers. And because they were not sure they were ready to become that person, they pulled away from the very feeling that was asking them to grow. Heaven saw that struggle in this story, my child. Not as punishment. Not as proof of some guaranteed destiny, but as the emotional truth of a person confronting the difference between wanting love and being ready to live honestly inside it. Your soulmate began realizing that their feelings for you were exposing areas of themselves they had avoided. Loving you meant becoming more honest. It meant communicating instead of disappearing into assumptions. It meant risking an answer they could not control. It meant accepting that affection without courage can become another form of silence. And so this letter has become more than a confession to you. It has become a confession to themselves. They have written words they once believed they would never say. I pretended I needed distance when what I really needed was courage. That sentence changed everything. Because after writing it, another memory returned. A memory involving you. Something you said, perhaps casually, perhaps with more emotion than they realized at the time. It was a moment when you showed them something true about yourself. Maybe you revealed what you valued. Maybe you expressed disappointment. Maybe you told them what you needed. Maybe you simply looked at them in a way that required no explanation. At the time, they did not understand the weight of that moment. Now they do. Now they recognize that you were giving them a doorway into deeper honesty, and they stood outside it because they were afraid to enter. They have replayed that memory repeatedly. And each time they do, the same question rises inside them: what would have happened if I had been brave enough then? This question is not destroying them. It is awakening them. There is a difference. Regret can either imprison a person or teach them. For a while, they allowed it to imprison them. They looked backward and criticized themselves for every hesitation. But recently something began changing. They realized that repeating the past inside their mind would not rewrite it. The only meaningful thing they could do was decide who they would become next. That is why the letter matters. Sending it would be an act of vulnerability they once avoided. It would mean releasing control over your response. It would mean telling the truth without demanding a particular outcome. And this is where you must listen carefully. Their letter does not ask you to rescue them. It does not ask you to put your life on hold. It does not demand that you believe every emotional word immediately. In fact, one of the most surprising parts is that they may admit they understand if you need time. They may acknowledge that a confession cannot erase every confusing moment. They may tell you that words alone are not enough, that if anything meaningful is to grow, it must be supported by consistency. This is what makes the letter different from the fantasy they once carried. They are no longer only imagining romance. They are beginning to understand responsibility. But still, the biggest confession remains hidden deeper within the page. Before they reach it, they begin speaking about the version of you they saw when you thought no one noticed. They remember your patience. They remember the way you continued carrying yourself through difficult moments. They remember how often you gave understanding without asking to be celebrated for it. Perhaps they noticed your strength only after distance gave them perspective. Sometimes people do not fully comprehend the warmth of a room until they have stepped outside into the cold. That is what happened emotionally. When your presence became less certain, they started recognizing the quiet ways it had mattered. There was comfort in knowing you existed in their world. They did not appreciate that comfort enough. This confession hurts them because it forces them to acknowledge something simple: they became accustomed to your emotional presence. They assumed there would always be another opportunity, another conversation, another moment to say what mattered. But time has a way of revealing the danger of assumptions. People change. Lives move. Hearts learn. Doors that remain open forever are rarely valued properly. And somewhere along the way, your soulmate began sensing that you had changed, not necessarily because you stopped caring, but because you began valuing your own peace more deeply. They noticed. Perhaps you spoke differently. Perhaps you stopped chasing clarity. Perhaps there was an emotional stillness in you they had never seen before. Whatever the sign, it awakened something in them. They realized you were no longer standing in the same inner place, waiting for them to make sense of themselves. And strangely, this did not make their feelings disappear. It made them more honest. That night, they returned to the letter. This time they did not delete the first paragraph. They continued. They wrote about the moments they almost contacted you. They described the strange conversations they had with themselves before opening your name on a screen. They admitted there were times they typed something and erased it because the message sounded too casual for what they actually felt. Other times, they wrote something honest and deleted it because honesty felt too dangerous. They became trapped between saying too little and saying too much. Eventually, saying nothing became their habit. But habits are not destiny. And now that pattern is breaking. My child, there is another layer you have not yet seen. Someone may have asked them about you recently. It could have been a friend, a family member, or simply a person who noticed a change in their expression when your name surfaced. The question itself may have been ordinary: do you still think about them? Your soulmate could have dismissed it. They could have laughed. They could have changed the subject. Perhaps they tried. But something in their reaction betrayed them. Their silence lasted too long. Their eyes revealed too much. And later, alone, they realized how exhausting it had become to keep pretending indifference. They knew the answer immediately. Yes. They still thought about you. More than they admitted. But then came the question that shook them even more: if you still care, why haven't you told them? There was no satisfying answer. Every explanation sounded smaller than the feeling they were protecting. Fear? Pride? Timing? Confusion? None of it felt strong enough anymore. That was when the letter stopped being an idea and became a decision. They began writing the section they had avoided from the beginning. The section containing the secret behind all the other secrets. They stared at the page for a long time because once those words existed outside their mind, they could no longer pretend they had never thought them. This confession was not about attraction. It was not about missing you. It was not even about regret. It was about the future. They wrote that somewhere along the way, without consciously deciding it, they began measuring other connections against what they experienced with you. They did not necessarily compare appearances or personalities. It was deeper. They compared how understood they felt. How naturally certain conversations unfolded. How your presence challenged them. How silence with you could still feel meaningful. And every time they noticed this comparison, they became uncomfortable because it forced them to recognize that what happened between you was not as replaceable as they had once assumed. This does not mean every connection in life must become permanent. It means some encounters leave a standard in the heart. They reveal what emotional depth feels like. Your soulmate began realizing that you had done exactly that. You showed them a version of closeness they could no longer unknow. And that is why the next sentence of the letter nearly made them stop writing. They wrote, "I thought I needed to move on from you, but what I really needed was to understand why I couldn't." For several minutes, they simply looked at those words. Then the truth came. They were not holding on because of obsession. They were holding on because something remained unfinished inside them. There were apologies not spoken, gratitude not expressed, truths not offered, and one confession they had never trusted themselves enough to make. They began understanding that closure does not always mean walking away. Sometimes closure begins when two people finally tell the truth without knowing what the truth will create. So they kept writing. They admitted they had been afraid that you would reject the person they truly were if they removed all the defenses. They admitted that some of their distance was not about you at all. It came from old wounds, old expectations, old experiences that taught them not to rely too deeply on another person. You entered their life carrying no responsibility for those wounds, yet somehow you encountered the walls built because of them. They understand that now. And because they understand it, their letter is beginning to sound different. Less dramatic. More sincere. They do not want to impress you with perfect sentences. They want to say the thing they were too frightened to say before. They want you to know that you mattered even in the moments when their actions made it seem otherwise. They want you to know that distance did not erase the connection from their memory. They want you to know they have wondered about your happiness, your peace, your dreams, and whether the life unfolding around you has treated your heart gently. Most of all, They want you to know there was a reason they could never fully close the chapter. But even this is not the biggest confession. The deepest truth sits near the end of the letter. They have not written it yet. They keep approaching that final paragraph, then stopping. Something about those last words changes the meaning of everything before them. Because once they write them, the letter will no longer be a reflection on what was. It will become a statement about what they want now. And wanting something now creates risk. They know you may have changed. They know you may no longer respond the way the earlier version of you would have. They know you may read their words with caution. They know they cannot simply arrive with emotion and expect your heart to forget everything it learned in their absence. Strangely, this awareness is not stopping them anymore. It is making their confession more mature. They are beginning to understand that real love does not say, "Choose me because I finally understand." Real love says, "Here is the truth. You are free to decide what it means to you." That freedom terrifies them. And yet, they are preparing to offer it. There is a powerful moment unfolding in this imagined letter now. Your soulmate sets down the pen, or closes the message, and walks away for a few minutes. They try to distract themselves. They look outside. They take a breath. They tell themselves they can finish tomorrow. But they return. Because tomorrow has become the excuse they used for too long. They sit again. Their heart is beating differently now. They scroll through everything they have written. The memories. The admission of fear. The acknowledgement of inconsistency. The truth about imagining a future with you. The confession that they compared other emotional connections to what they felt with you. The realization that they were never truly trying to forget you, they were trying to understand why you remained so significant. Then they reached the blank space. The final paragraph. This is where heaven seems unusually quiet in the story, as though even the unseen world is allowing human courage to have its moment. Your soulmate begins with 3 words. They stop. Delete them. Begin again. Their eyes fill with emotion, not because something terrible has happened, but because they are finally approaching the truth they have spent so long outrunning. They know that after writing this sentence, they cannot return to pretending their feelings were merely nostalgia. They write again. This time they leave the words on the page. I still. They stop. Their fingers hover. Everything you have heard so far has been leading here. The secret letter was never only meant to reveal how they felt in the past. It was meant to reveal what they have decided about you now. And the next words, the words they are finally preparing to place after, I still, are the confession they have been afraid could change everything between you.